Gene Simmons, the fire-breathing demon of Kiss, the immortal face of rock and roll all night, the showman who turned thunder, blood, and flame into rock's relentless pulse. He didn't just form a band, he built an empire. From smoky clubs to stadiums blazing with light, he carried a flag of defiance. For millions, he isn't merely a musician, he's proof that survival is possible. Iron will forged in chaos. Yet, the mask hides a life cut, opened by storms, wounds so deep the roar of 1,000 arenas couldn't drown them out. And now, at 76, when sunset should promise calm, a heavier cloud lingers over the last act of a man many thought unbreakable. If Gene Simmons ever sparked your spirit, press like, honor the legend who still bears both blazing glory and unhealed ache. Picture the nights when the table sat empty, hunger the only companion, winter creeping in like an enemy. No heat, no comfort. Just a coat sewn from a cast-off army blanket and walls so thin the wind walked through. Inside those rooms, silence felt heavier than stone, broken only by the muffled sobs of a child alone, while his mother worked herself past exhaustion. On August 25, 1949, that child was born Chaim Witz, the boy who would become Gene Simmons. His mother, Flora, survived wartime camps as a teenager, quiet, steadfast, carrying scars no language could hold. Tears arrived without warning. Her protectiveness could feel smothering. Underneath it all lived a love cast in fire. She was his shield and anchor, his moral compass, as he later said, the one solid truth when the world was made of storms. The storms still came. At 6, poverty and despair split the family. His father walked out, no letters, no visits, nothing but silence. The cut never closed. As an only child, Gene was pushed into the role of man of the house far too soon. Poverty stalked their days. Rent lurked like a monster. Flora put in 15 hours a day at the factory, sewing until her hands bled, then returned to a home of exhaustion and quiet. They pinballed from one small apartment to another, never certain they'd be allowed to stay. To help, Gene picked wild fruit to sell by the road. He learned early that every coin costs sweat. Winter bit through a blanket coat. His shoes barely held together. And loneliness stung worst, nights of crying himself to sleep in an empty room. School wasn't a refuge. His accent and foreignness made him a target. Classrooms felt like battlefields, whispers cut like knives. Even in the land of survival, hate found him. Then a door opened. Comic books, Superman, Spider-Man, heroes with impossible strength. He didn't just read them, he clung to them, as if each panel kept him afloat. He couldn't read English at first, tracing words with shaking fingers until meaning appeared. By 7, he was juggling Hebrew, Hungarian, Turkish, and English, set on mastering the language of heroes. Each page wasn't distraction. It was escape, defiance, hope. By 1957, Flora gathered what strength she had left and took her son to America. They arrived in Queens with no father waiting, no relatives to lean on, no money, and no English. Just 2 immigrants holding on to each other and a will to survive. That boy, scarred by hunger and abandonment, and his mother's quiet grief, would one day become the fire-breathing demon the world called Gene Simmons. But before the fire, there was the storm, and a child who refused to be broken. At 8, he laid down Chaim Witz and took the name Eugene Gene Klein, a first attempt to outrun old scars and claim a future. The cruelty didn't stop. The accent drew jokes. Second-hand clothes drew stares. Quiet marked him as strange. Jewish school couldn't hold him. Public school cut deeper. Each classroom became a stage for humiliation. Laughter branded him an outsider. Still, he refused to surrender. He sold cactus plants door to door for coins. He sliced meat in butcher shops and worked deli counters, whatever survival required. Every coin grew into a shield against hunger. While some his age drifted to alcohol or smoke, Gene clung to clarity, convinced his mind would be the ladder out of the shadows. Under the TV's flicker and the worn pages of comics, he pushed his English forward. Superheroes proving that power can rise from pain. Then came February 9, 1964. The Beatles hit The Ed Sullivan Show and electrified the world. Gene sat frozen, heart thundering at a realization he'd never shake. I want that life. I want to be somebody. By 19, he wore the mask of a school teacher in Spanish Harlem, guiding sixth graders for $75 a week. Inside him, music roared like a storm. Then he met Paul Stanley, a partner with the same hunger for something louder, larger, unforgettable. They formed Rainbow, which evolved into Wicked Lester. In 1972, at Electric Lady Studios, built by Jimi Hendrix, they poured themselves into an album. It was supposed to be their start. Executives called it too strange, too messy, shelved. Years later, after Kiss ruled the world, Gene paid $138,000 to buy back those masters, not to release, but to lock away. Proof that failure can stalk even the strongest. From wreckage, he made fuel. As he liked to say, failure wasn't a wall, it was firewood. At 24, Gene and Paul doubled down. With drummer Peter Criss and guitarist Ace Frehley, they created Kiss, a band unlike anything on earth. Their first show at the Coventry in Queens drew about a dozen people, most of them girlfriends. But Gene had already stepped into destiny, bat-winged eye paint, blood-spitting, fire-breathing. He birthed the demon, stitched together from horror films, comic books, and the dark edges of imagination. The demon, he later admitted, was everything I couldn't be as a boy, fearless, untouchable, unforgettable. And unforgettable it was. No radio singles. No MTV slots, no chart hits. What they had was spectacle. The legend spread by word of mouth. Blood, fire, chaos on stage. Within 2 years, they jumped from empty rooms to roaring arenas. In 1975, Alive exploded, bottling the screams, the flames, the thunder, and sold millions. It saved their record label and made Kiss immortal. For Gene, the hungry kid who cried alone in the dark, storm became flame. From hunger to thunder, from silence to spectacle, he had arrived, and the world couldn't look away. By the mid-70s, Kiss was more than a band. It was a phenomenon. Destroyer, shaped by Bob Ezrin, bent chaos toward near symphony, choirs, strings, theater sewn into crushing riffs. The lights grew blinding, crowds swelled, makeup calcified into myth. Behind the paint, cracks spread. Ezrin demanded control, rewriting songs and reshaping sound, bruising egos. To Gene, the music was fire. The studio felt like a battlefield where every note cost trust. Success never tasted so bitter. As the decade closed, spectacle hit a breaking point. The Dynasty Tour turned arenas into steel and flame war zones. Gene flew above the stage, spitting fire into the crowd's roar. Beneath the noise, silence crept in. The diehards drifted. A disco-tinted record earned radio play, but dulled the rebellion that made them legends. Families filled seats once owned by fanatics. Arenas began to echo, downsizing, cancellations, shadows across the empire. You can survive bad reviews, Gene said, but you can't survive empty seats. Backstage, the chaos cut deeper. Peter Criss spiraled into addiction. Shows buckled under his rage. Songs stopped midstream. Outbursts flared. Sabotage grew at the center of their sound. Gene called it self-destruction, a cancer eating the foundation built with blood and sweat. On stage, the flames dazzled. Off stage, they burned the band alive. Then came the low point. To grab a wider audience, Kiss signed on for Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, produced by Hanna-Barbera of Scooby-Doo fame. Gods of Thunder became cartoon figures. Fans felt betrayed, critics laughed, and the band wanted to bury it. Gene loved attention, but he knew the mask had cracked. We thought we could be superheroes, he said later. Instead, we became a punchline. By the early 80s, their faces were stamped on dolls and lunchboxes. Fame everywhere at a cost. Egos collided. Fans drifted. The brotherhood born in fire began to split. The demon still roared, but Gene wondered if his flame lit a path or set it on fire. Survival demanded reinvention. Peter left. Eric Carr, the Fox, gave Kiss a second heartbeat. Had they wandered too far from the hunger that built them? Gene and Paul made their boldest move. In front of millions, they took off the war paint. For the first time in a decade, the world saw their faces. Not surrender, defiance. Lick It Up hit hard, went platinum, and proved the bet paid off. Taking off the makeup was survival, Gene said. We were more than costumes. We were a force, but the winds kept shifting. Rock lurched heavier and faster. New idols rose. Kiss chased trends. Glam sheen, power ballads, softer turns. earning cheers and backlash. We chased trends, Gene admitted, and sometimes the trends chased us. Fans argued whether the band lost its soul. Seats emptied again. Yet the machine kept rolling, night after night, a stubborn act of survival. Gene branched into film, villain roles like Runaway, the demon on the big screen. Rumors swirled that Gene drifted while Paul kept Kiss afloat. Tension simmered over money and identity. Were they still Kiss or just men who once wore the mask? Then the reunion no one expected. In the mid-1990s, Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter returned, painted like the gods had risen. 75 cities, 92 shows, over 1 million tickets, $143 million earned. Stadiums shook. Generations cried. Thunder returned. Behind the smiles, the wounds bled. Ace and Peter were paid flat fees, $80,000 a night, while Gene and Paul took the larger share. Lawsuits followed. Bitterness resurfaced. The Brotherhood of Fire became a battlefield again. For Gene, those decades felt like resurrection and reckoning, unmasking, new chart runs, Hollywood turns, and the richest tour of their lives. Every victory carried a shadow, shifting styles, creative wars, legal fights, and the strain of holding an empire together, while the world tried to pry it apart. Through every storm, Gene stayed standing. The demon could stumble, bleed, even burn, but he rose. Survival wasn't only a win, it was glory's purest form. On stage, Gene Simmons was untouchable. Off stage, he was human, and in love, even legends can bleed. In 1979, as Kiss ruled arenas and Gene's face glared from lunchboxes, he began a romance with Cher, a pop icon who knew storms and reinvention. They seemed like opposites, her, radiant and glamorous, him, the flame-breathing demon. Together they found a delicate calm. Gene later said Cher gave him a stability he'd never known. She hinted he made her laugh when life was heavy, and that behind the mask she saw a man clawing for peace. But the spark that drew them together scorched everything. In the early 1980s, Gene's attention turned to Diana Ross, Cher's closest friend. What began as curiosity became one of Hollywood's most painful betrayals. To the public, scandal. To Cher, devastation, losing both a partner and a friend. Years later, she admitted the pain never fully faded. Diana carried her own guilt. Loving Gene meant embracing fire. Hurting Cher became a weight she couldn't set down. The sisterhood turned to ash. Headlines cast Gene as the villain, and fans who once cheered began to whisper. "I thought I was chasing love," he said later. "I was running from myself." The wound was deeper than image. It cut into conscience. No one paid more than Shannon Tweed. Under the harsh lights of reality TV, one image burned into memory. Shannon, after nearly 28 years by Gene's side, feeding a stack of Polaroids to the flames. Not souvenirs, ghosts. Thousands of faces from a life lived too fast. On stage, the demon commanded fire. At home, the flames consumed secrets. For Shannon, it wasn't a stunt. It was heartbreak made visible. For Gene, humiliation, and a mirror. Rewind to 1983. Shannon didn't enter as a spark. She arrived as a steady flame, grace under pressure, quick wit, grounding presence. With her, Gene found what arenas can't offer. A light left on past midnight, laughter in a quiet kitchen, a home where armor could be set down. In 1989, their son Nick was born. In 1992, their daughter Sophie. For a man who grew up without a father, fatherhood felt like revelation. He admitted the sound of his children's laughter was louder than any crowd. Shannon carried the hidden weight, building a family without a vow. Warm holidays with a quiet ache. Love without recognition, devotion without permanence. Time didn't soften it, it hardened. 28 years is a long time to wait. On national TV, Shannon spoke plainly. She felt invisible, and the limbo was breaking her. Fans wept with her. Critics mocked Gene. The deeper truth, a woman exhausted by uncertainty. A man mistaking fear for freedom. Gene's boasts of thousands of conquests weren't power, they were armor, formed by a boy abandoned and a mother who had already lost too much. He learned that love can vanish. He built walls and called them freedom. To Shannon, each broken promise was another wound. The cracks widened under public lights, red carpet photos, fights, therapy on camera. The counseling couch became a stage with no makeup and no exit. He said he wasn't built for marriage. She said she was tired of building a life for two alone. He insisted he loved his family. She asked why love never arrived with a ring. Then came fire, the Polaroids. Paper can't erase betrayal, but it can draw a line between before and after. Shannon wasn't burning history. She was reclaiming herself. Gene, stripped of pretense, learned the demon is powerless before a woman demanding truth. Finally, in 2011, the running stopped. At 62, Gene Simmons stood before Shannon Tweed and made the vow she had waited 28 years to hear. The wedding wasn't a fairy tale, too many scars, too many nights lost, but it was a reckoning. The man who once said he needed no one admitted that love is the only fire worth tending. For Shannon, it wasn't erasure, it was acknowledgement. For Gene, surrender. For Nick and Sophie, hope. The vows didn't fix the past, but they gave the family a new language. Trust. In later years, Gene said what bravado had hidden. His refusal to commit wasn't arrogance. It was fear. I thought I was protecting myself, he said quietly. I was running from what I needed. The boy who lost his father became a man afraid of permanence, leaving before he could be left. With Shannon, he learned the hardest truth. Strength is loyalty. Not fleeing but staying. Shannon never claimed sainthood. She called it endurance. Love isn't magic, it's daily trust. Business thundered on, branding, licensing, empire building, but shadows stayed. In the late 2000s, Nick was accused of lifting from the manga Bleach for his own comic. Tabloids feasted. For Gene, the deeper wound was the whisper he'd failed as a father, a brutal echo for a man who swore his kids would never feel the absence he knew. By the 2000s, Kiss had become the most merchandised band in history. To Gene, it was vision. To critics, desecration. Kiss will sell everything but their souls. Being called a salesman stung in ways applause couldn't fix. Then came symbols and backlash. In 2017, Gene tried to trademark the devil horn's hand gesture. He saw protection. The world saw arrogance. The blowback was immediate. He withdrew, but the bruises stayed, grasping, opportunistic, trying to own what isn't his. Add legal accusations, many settled quietly, and the invincible image cracked. The demon who breathed fire now walked through a hailstorm of doubt, publicly unbowed, privately weighed down. I don't apologize for success, he once said. Later, he faced the harder truth. Applause builds empires. Only trust earns respect. All that noise couldn't match 2018, the silence of loss. He said goodbye to Flora Klein, not just his mother, but a Holocaust survivor who bent her back in sweatshops so he could eat. The shield who carried pain so he didn't have to. My mother is my hero, Gene said. Whatever strength I have, I got from her. At the funeral there was no fire, only a son's sobs. Fans saw the boy behind the demon. I've lost my greatest teacher, he said. She taught me survival, dignity, love. The phone would never ring again. Shannon, Nick, and Sophie felt the same absence. Even legends bow to grief. To honor her, Gene carried her lessons forward. I am because she was, he said, no mask, just a son. In 2019, his body pushed back, a stone hidden deep, small but vicious. The legend who strode in 7 boots lay under surgical lights. Even giants bleed. Surgery saved him. The deeper scars were the stillness. For a man wired for motion, stopping hurt. Shannon, Nick, and Sophie sat at his side, anchoring him when currents pulled. It wasn't only pain, it was a meeting with mortality. In 2023, the lesson came again. In Brazil's brutal heat, he collapsed from dehydration mid-show. The Titan who once flew over arenas sat trembling, forcing himself forward as thousands watched. Not spectacle, survival. Applause turned to prayer. Afterward, he spoke softly. The body reminds you, no one is forever. In his family's arms, he found the truest lights. By the mid-2020s, Gene Simmons still refused to yield. In 2024, while peers retired, he launched a solo run and rolled out the bold roadie for a day VIP package. The price was steep. Tickets vanished, critics sneered. Fans lined up. The contradiction remains, the ultimate salesman, and still magnetic. Then 2025 hushed business and music alike with the death of his friend Ozzy Osbourne. Two forces of chaos who crisscrossed the same circuits, backstage jokes, late-night meals. "Gene, the world thinks we're madmen," Ozzy once muttered. "Let them. At least we're honest." That line stayed with Gene. "Ozzy was always himself," Gene said. "I can't always say the same. I played the game." Ozzy never did. He was the game. At the next show, Gene asked for silence. The opening riff of War Pigs rolled out. He bowed his head as the crowd roared Ozzy's name. When he finally sang, his voice broke. Not a performer's growl, but a brother's goodbye. Thousands wept. It was tribute, confession, gratitude, and farewell in one. Now, at 76, Gene lives less by the stadium clock and more by family and reflection. With Shannon Tweed, the woman who waited nearly 28 years for his vow, he spends days in a new oceanfront eco-villa in Malibu. Glass and cedar, solar across the roof, hidden rainwater systems, native gardens in bloom. Not spectacle, continuity. A quieter empire meant to last. Every window opening to the sea reminds him that permanence, once his greatest fear, can be freedom. The contrast is sharp. The Beverly Hills mansion, now listed for $14 million, was a fortress of legend. Grand staircases, chandeliers, platinum-lined walls, a museum, not a home. Soon its marble will echo with other footsteps. The Las Vegas estate is gone, sold, a chapter closed. Those were houses for a performer. Malibu is a home for a man. Luxury remains, but the symbols changed. Wood, stone, ocean, silence. Presence over applause. He once measured life by square footage and spotlights. Now by mornings with Shannon, the rhythm of waves, and a place that doesn't move when the tour bus does. Wealth was never the riddle. With a net worth in the hundreds of millions, he speaks bluntly about inheritance. Nick and Sophie won't be cushioned by fortune. Much will go to charity. They have my name and my lessons, he says. That's worth more than any check. Harsh to some, principle to others. To those who know the story, it's the boy who lived on bread and silence, insisting that survival must be earned.